Welcome to Write Better, Right Now, Write with Pride, brought to you by the San Diego Press Club. I'm going to introduce you to Press Club board member, freelance journalist, and founder of Cues in the News, America's original LGBTQ+ town hall series, Thom Senzee. Thom?
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce our panelists. We'll go straight into an introduction of Neal Broverman, who is digital editor-in-chief of The Advocate and editor-in-chief of Plus, The Advocate's sister magazine on health and HIV issues. A University of Connecticut journalism graduate, Neal launched his career working with The Advocate's first female editor-in-chief, Judy Weeder. Neal also contributes to Out, a sister publication of The Advocate, and Plus. He previously served as an editor at Curbed, writing for many years about transportation and development. Neal has contributed to the Hartford Courant, USA Today, Angeleno, Los Angeles Magazine, and the Los Angeles Times. He lives with his husband and children and dachshund in Los Angeles. Mey Rude is a staff writer at Out magazine and The Advocate, as well as a transgender-sensitivity reader. She's been working in LGBTQ+ media for 8 years and has contributed to various news sites, including BuzzFeed, BEM, and Autostraddle. With that, I think we're just going to dive right into some questions, and we'll just go randomly. This one will be for Mey. Mey, can you tell us what are the strongest, most important stories you are writing about now as a media professional, as a journalist working in the LGBTQ+ media space?
Yeah, well, so I felt this way my whole career, but anytime I get a chance to write stories about trans women, I'm a trans woman, I'm a Latina, and so when I get to write stories about trans women of color, that's always very important to me. And especially right now with all of the anti-trans bills that are being introduced and being passed in states across the country, whenever I get to write a happy story about trans people or a story about a trans person succeeding and thriving, those things are always my favorites to write.
Well, I mean, is there a tendency to, or actually, no, let me flip that around. Is there an opportunity, it sounds like you take advantage of it, if there is one, to flip the script a little bit and make transgender people not the objects of pity, right? They're the most vulnerable, among the most vulnerable people in society, but they are not just that, are they?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you? And so these are important stories for you at this point.
Yeah, one of my biggest inspirations as a journalist is Monica Roberts, who passed away recently. And on her blog, Transgrio, I remember when I first came out almost a decade ago now, she was one of the only people regularly covering like happy stories about trans people, regularly writing, here are successful trans people, here are trans people from history, here are our heroes and the people making a difference and people who are succeeding in business or in art or whatever. And that really helped me to feel more secure about my identity and more like I had a chance to be happy and like I had a chance to be successful. And so now whenever I can do that same kind of thing and write things other than about the murders of trans people or write things about other than anti-trans bills or hate crimes, that's always my favorite thing to do.
Thank you. Neal, how about you? What are the strongest, most important stories you are writing and editing now?
Well, I have to say, it's kind of the opposite of Mey in that, not that I enjoy these stories, obviously, but covering the violence against trans people, to me, is the biggest story that we're covering right now. And it's not getting the attention that it deserves, this epidemic of violence, especially against trans women of color. And I think, sometimes we have to shout about it because It just is, it still does not get the attention it deserves. It's really an epidemic of violence.
Oh gosh, I mean, from where you sit, if not the advocate, then who?
Right, exactly. So, I think that continues to be a big story. And, as May mentioned, the legislation that is pending and or passed in several states, and we're going to see this continue, I think, as we get closer to the midterms and the 2024 election. I think the Republicans see this as a wedge issue that will drive their supporters to the polls. So I think that trans people will be targeted more and more. So that's something that we have to be aware of, and we have to remind our readers to be cognizant of. And there's a trickle down effect just with those bills. It affects trans youth, it affects all queer youth when they see that trans girls can't compete in girl sports, and that they are limited.
It's like the voter. It's sort of like the voter restriction laws. It's a solution in search of a problem that there hasn't been much, if
Right.
any, exemplars.
Yeah, and I mean, and they're going beyond even the athletics issue. I mean, some states are still restricting bathroom use. They're telling parents what kind of gender affirming care their kids can have. I mean, it's really sort of goes against the ethos of what small government people are supposed to like, which is let me live my life. They're inserting government into parental decisions, and it's scary right now. And I think in a lot of ways our readers are a little burnt out from the Trump years and from COVID, and they do want those happy stories, but we can't disregard the scary things that are continuing to happen in the post-Trump and I mean, we're not quite post-COVID years yet, but hopefully we're getting there.
We're getting there, yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for those replies. Those answers are informative, and it's a good segue into a sort of basics question, I guess, from at least from your perspective, and maybe more people than I realize. But how important is it for journalists who don't necessarily work within an LGBTQ plus affirmative or environment where, I mean, I've written for a publication regularly that refuses to stop mispronouncing. So misgendering and using pronouns other than the one that the subject requests or identifies with. How important are pronouns and why?
I mean, I'll let May take this one because
okay,
it's more personal. I think
they're vitally important. Misgendering a trans person isn't just a rhetorical thing; it's an act of violence, and it causes trauma. Trans people have extremely high rates of depression and of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. And the more we're misgendered, the more times we're misgendered over and over again, especially the more people who can see it, that causes trauma on us. And then, but not only that, when you do misgender or use the wrong pronouns for a trans person, you're also opening them up to violence from other people.
It's like a green light. It's a green light that says that person is not who they say they are.
Exactly. This woman is actually a man, or this non-binary person is actually whatever. Like, yeah, you're saying it's okay to disrespect this person, to insult this to treat them like they're not human.
This is sort of a subtext to that, I guess, but I think it's equally important. I don't know if journalists have the opportunity to make this mistake frequently, but I can conceive of it happening. Can you talk just briefly about what a dead name is and why a person shouldn't use it?
Yeah, so a dead name is also called a birth name. It's the name you were born as, that after you've transitioned or come out, you no longer use that name, you've changed your name. And it doesn't matter if you've changed it legally, if you've changed it on your passport or not, or your birth certificate or not. Some states, it's a lot harder to change on certain documents. And also, if you don't have money, then you can't do a legal name change. It costs a lot of money. In a lot of places, you have to pay for a newspaper ad to change your money or to change your name. But so it's a dead name is your previous name that shouldn't be used anymore. It should be dead, as it says in the name. You don't. It's not relevant to the news. It's not. You like, as a basic rule, like I don't even really look up like trans people's dead names when I'm writing about them. Like it's just not pertinent to the story 99% of the time. And so it's, yeah, a dead name is a name that should be dead and not used.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Neal?
I mean, I think May covered it. I think it's an issue that we run into when we're covering incidents of violence against trans people, and the initial stories are covered in often if they're covered in local media, local television stations or small papers, and I'm not generalizing. It's just that's where we encounter a lot of problems. And I think it's maybe even just a rush to publish. But you know, we have to correct those incidents when we see, you know, someone being dead named or wrong pronouns being used. But and a lot of times the initial reports of trans stories, specifically trans violence, is where you see a lot of dead naming going on.
Yeah, and often also that's because the police report will dead name the person.
Right.
Talking more about that specifically with trans violence or violence against trans people. I know that a thing that I have been terrified of for a long time is after I die that I'll be dead named and misgendered, because then I have no control anymore, you know, and that's a terrifying thing for most trans people, I think.
Gosh, you know, thinking about that, I mean, this is so at the heart of journalism. These issues, think about, I mean, the last major thing that happens, you know, when you finish this life is you have a funeral or a cremation and a service, a memorial, and an obituary. And that obituary means so much to the legacy of the person, to their friends and family and so on. And if the person can trust, and that's journalism, an obituary is a journalistic art. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and again, shout out to Monica Roberts. Like that's another reason why I got into LGBTQ journalism, was because, again, when I first came out, Monica Roberts was one of the only places that would correctly gender and correctly name trans people who had been murdered. And so I wanted, and for a long time, I used to cover trans murders at Autostraddle, where I worked for 6+ years. And I wanted to help make that more prevalent, make it, because when you search for news about a dead trans person, still it happens a little bit, but it used to be a lot more. 99% of the stories you would see would be misgendering and dead naming the person. Now it's a lot better because places like The Advocate and Out cover these stories and use the correct names and don't misgender. And so it's a lot better now than it was even just 5 years ago.
It must feel great to be a part of the team that you're on now and have that opportunity to sort of spread the word of doing better journalism by being more accurate.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm thinking, you know, if you're joining us and you're thinking that, gosh, all of this is so complicated, and how am I supposed to, all these letters and all of these, dead name, what's, you know, there's a guide, there's a style guide that I think every journalist should have. It's the, I'm going to ask, let me put this in the form of a question. What is in NLGJA, and should all writers consider acquiring a copy of their style guide? Let's go to Neal on that one.
That's the National Lesbian Gay, I believe it's inclusive of all the letters: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer Journalists Association. But it's just the acronym is NLGJA. And yeah, it's a great organization of journalists, and they will advise on the proper usage of terminology, pronouns, of just accurate ways to cover the queer community. I've only been to one of their meetings, their gatherings, and it was there was not a dull moment. I mean, they have
Palm
very interesting.
Springs 2017?
2018, I
18.
think it was 2018. Yeah.
I ran into you
Um,
there.
yeah. Yeah, it was, you know, they have very interesting panels where there's some contentious issues that are brought up. You know, we were at that point, um, it was right after Me Too, and so there were a lot of issues of harassment and proper behavior within newsrooms, within you know, coverage of, with journalists, how they interact with each other. So there were some interesting discussions, and I think it was, for me, who's never a huge person to join groups or organizations, it was really eye-opening to me. It's just I remember I went to a panel where a CNN editor went over how they do headlines. It was CNN and the New York Post, and they went through their whole process of how they do headlines, and it was so different from what we've done at at the Advocate or Los Angeles Magazine, any of the places I've worked at, where they kind of workshop it. We never really have time at the Advocate, but it was really fascinating to see what these larger outlets that have a lot of money and a lot of human power do when it comes to marketing their stories. So that was really fascinating.
Well,
But
that's a
yeah,
whole other panel discussion. But I
I know.
love I love the art of headline writing. It's not my forte, and having been an editor, I always felt good when I stumbled and I managed to put a great headline together. Headlines are a little bit different I don't know if they're different. I think they're special. I think they're unique. At Pride Media, in the stable of titles that the Advocate is part of, is the flagship of. What if you had to say, there's a guiding principle in your headline writing, what would it be?
Well, we obviously we have to get readers, we have to get people clicking on the story, but we don't, and I am responsible for a lot of the headlines, and so it's a you know you don't want to be too salacious. I don't like to be too salacious, and I don't like clickbait, but sometimes you do sort of have to not give away the farm with the headline. You have to give incentive to people for people to click on the story. So that's definitely part of it. But I don't like trying to trick the reader. It's a delicate dance, and I've done it for many years, so it's sort of second nature to me. But it's definitely an art. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's heartbreaking because it's marketing. It's really, you're marketing a story, and sometimes you'll have a story that's really important and really well written and well researched, and it just doesn't get the eyes on it. And then if you just kind of massage the headline a little, it does get that attention. So
Well, I mean, I can certainly speak to that. I spent a couple of years as your world news correspondent, and trying to get the amount of traffic we wanted on those stories. I almost wonder if maybe nowadays, as the evolution of the organization's headline writing has progressed, like maybe that would do better. But the thing is, some stories should just be done. They need to be part of a record somewhere. And when it comes to LGBTQ plus stories, you're going to be the fail-safe. I think the backstop against there being no record of it. You're sort of the news organization of record for the LGBTQ plus community. I assume most people know what the Advocate is, but maybe before we move on to the next question, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit here, tell people just a little thumbnail of the Advocate. Like, what is the Advocate?
It was founded in 1967. I believe it was in the fall of '67. It was in response to a police raid on the Black Cat Bar, which is a little bar in Silver Lake that is still in existence, but it's in much different, I think caters to a straighter crowd, more gentrified crowd. But back then it was sort of a little hole in the wall, and it was just one of the many gay bars that proliferated on the east side of Los Angeles. And the police raided the bar. It was New Year's Eve '66, turning into '67, and two of the men there decided, they became involved in the growing gay liberation movement and the protesting against police abuses and unfair police practices that were so common in that day. And they
2 years before Stonewall. 2 years.
Those 2 years before Stonewall. Yeah, there was a lot of activism in California. I'm sure in San Diego. I know more about in Los Angeles and San Francisco. There was a riot at a donut shop in Los Angeles in '59. There was the Compton's cafeteria riot in San Francisco was sometime before Stonewall. So there was a lot of pre-Stonewall activity in California that doesn't kind of get discounted. But back to the Black Cat, one of the guys that was there who worked at CBS, he did something at CBS Studios. He had access to a big copy machine, and so he created the first newsletter for the group, the Gay Liberation Group, and it was called the Los Angeles Advocate, and he started printing it, and it just kind of spread like wildfire, and it spread to other cities. It became national, went to the coast pretty quickly, and they renamed it the Advocate because it was no longer Los Angeles specific. And it, it's gone through many iterations and different styles, and but yeah, it's been around since '67. It's the oldest continuously published LGBTQ magazine in the country. There were ones that are older, but this is the oldest one that's still in production. And digital, when I started way back in 2004, I was very young, but the website was really an afterthought. It was really all about the magazine, and the magazine is clearly still a big part of it, but the website is really where we get the most eyes, and we get millions of users throughout the world are seeing our stories. It's exciting to think that we just have such a huge audience, and we have all kinds of people reading our content, not just people in Hillcrest or in the Castro. There's people in Oklahoma, there's people in France, people in Canada.
Absolutely. Just look at the comments and you get a sense of that. It's truly an international title and has been for a long time.
Yeah.
I think I want to just say that having mentioned the NLDJA style guide, I think we can share a link, or you can Google it. Anyone can Google it. It might be worth having. It looks like this, and it's online too, I'm sure. So it's an actual little thin style book. So in addition to your AP style guide, you might consider that, attendees.
And I think if you're unsure of how to cover, if you're feeling, unsure about how you're portraying someone, whether they're non-binary or trans or bisexual, just ask or Google. It's always, rather don't rush because you don't want to get it wrong. So just do some research if you're unsure.
Great advice. Good advice. So we're going to move on to a related question to some of the previous questions, but I think it is a different nature. What are some of your best tips on writing about transgender people of all ages? Are there considerations when you're talking about a minor? What are some good tips for people who want to write well, write with pride, and write respectfully and accurately and responsibly?
You want to grab this, Mey?
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing to remember when you're writing about trans youth is that they're kids. They're
wow. So simple.
Like that. Yeah, it's very simple, but it gets forgotten so much in the way that the Republican Party and right-wing media portrays trans kids is like they're writing a story about an 8-year-old trans girl who's trying to play soccer, but they use language like sexual predators and assaulting women in bathrooms and things like that, which have nothing to do with little kids and have nothing to do with trans people also. But
And FYI, being transgender does not mean automatically being an activist or
yeah,
necessarily
and
even a
that,
progressive person.
yeah,
I've had
yeah,
many very, very far right transgender women on my panel. They love Donald Trump.
yeah.
And so, yeah, making assumptions about people. But I think you can always, your advice about remembering that kids are kids is really sound advice. That's a little kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't bully
They're
the little
not,
kids.
they're like you said, they're not professional activists. They're not, they don't even, most of the time they don't even want the attention. You know, they just want to play soccer, or they just want to use the bathroom, or they just want to get health care. And so just remembering that and focusing on that, that the story, I think, is more about the people who are oppressing trans people than it is about the trans youth who are just trying to live their lives.
Well said. How is writing for an LGBTQ plus publication different than writing for a mainstream publication? Oh, go ahead and answer that one, Mey, since we've got you on the screen, and we'll let Neal weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is just the audience that you're writing for and kind of the language that you assume they know or don't know. When I'm writing for The Advocate or for Out, I don't have to explain what non-binary means. I don't have to explain pronouns. I don't have to do the like trans 101, LGBTQ 101. It's also, I mean, for me, a part of it is that like I really like writing for queer publications because I like writing stories that I know queer people will read and that will mean things to queer people. And so that's a really big passion of mine, is writing for that audience, because so much of the media is not for us.
Neal, when you, or I don't know if this ever happens anymore, but I was always surprised when someone doesn't understand that there is plenty. You can't keep up with how much newsworthy news there is that is just about LGBTQ plus people and issues and arts and culture. Can either of you give us, Neal, give us a sense of the volume, the sheer volume that you deal with at Pride Media?
Well, there's no shortage of stories. You just have to make sure you're finding the stories that people want to read. And it's changed a lot just in the past 6 months. And just to your question before about how is it different running for a niche publication or one that's specific to LGBTQ audiences like The Advocate or Out. Excuse me. I think we're allowed definitely more opinion, and we can write from the vantage point of being part of a marginalized group. And when we had Trump in office, we wouldn't have to sugarcoat the fact that he was an enemy to our community. We didn't have to sort of dance this dance where he's just a typical president, or he's just take what he says as truth. So I think we were free to insert a lot more, not even commentary, just honesty, because most of our readers are on the same page about certain things, not everything certainly, but certain things we are all on the same page, and so that gave us a little more flexibility. We didn't have to be unbiased about everything, which I think is kind of exhausting, because as journalists we are still people, and trying to be this robot that has no take on anything is just becoming more and more unrealistic, or just impossible to follow through with. So to your question about volume, yeah, there's plenty of stories. Again, it's just that one of the hardest parts of my job is deciding what is worth covering and what is going to resonate. And there's stories that we cover that I kind of know are not going to do well, but it's our responsibility to cover them. I wish, and we have limited resources too. A lot of us are stretched between different publications, like myself, and it's tough. So there's plenty of stories I would love to write. And now with Pride, we're getting, May can speak to this, and probably you as well, Tom. We're getting inundated with pitch after pitch after pitch about Pride. Most
Yeah.
of them are not that great. Most of them are about, this company is putting out, a bumper sticker that's pink, and will you write a story about it? So obviously we're not
And
gonna
they
do
put a
that.
rainbow stripe on their cookies.
Right, exactly. So, those are a dime a dozen, but there are some stories coming out of Pride that are worth covering, but we just can't get to all of them because um, we just don't have the human power. We don't um, we don't have the resources. So I wish we could cover more than we do, but we don't need to cover every Pride pitch that we receive. We certainly don't.
You probably wouldn't have been able to make this panel if you were doing
No.
that. So I'm going to ask Mey, do you have any particular style tips as a writer, as a reporter, keeping in mind that those are sort of two different things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say? Let's just get into some real nuts and bolts of just good writing and good reporting from Mey Rude perspective.
Well, so like I was an English major in college. I didn't study journalism. And then for a lot of my writing career, I was focused more on like personal essays, that kind of thing. So like transitioning to now where every day I wake up and I write, 3 or 4 news stories. It's been a bit of a challenge sometimes, but honestly, I think my main writing tip would be get a good editor. Get an editor who knows how to push you and who knows what they're doing, and so that they can help to shape you into a better writer. I've had all the editors out in the Advocate that I've had have been really, really helpful. I've been a journalist for a while, but this is my first full-time staff position after 8 years of being a journalist. And so it's been really cool learning all these new, they're not new, but adjusting my writing
But you do
style.
get a different experience working in the news, don't you? You get more honing of your skill, I think.
Exactly. Honing is a good word, because you've got to cut down on rambling or opining. Sometimes you just need to get a news story quickly. You need to get the details and the facts and get it in so that people can read it.
I always think of, on this topic, I think of one of the first bits of advice that my first journalism advisor gave Jillian Combs from El Camino College in Torrance. She said, it's great if you can write. We really just need you to report. We just need you to find out what happened, where it happened, what time it happened, how many are dead, and so on. If you can write, that's great too, right? But please just get us the information.
Mm-hmm.
You'll end up a fine writer, but the reporting comes first.
Yeah, you need to summarize and restate the things in a way that makes sense and that puts it in order and in context, so that the details that you get from the news story turn into a story instead of just a list of details.
And what say you, Neal, on some tips about writing versus reporting?
Well, I wish we all had more time to do writing, feature writing, and a lot of the daily stuff is reporting. But part of my job is overseeing the op-eds and the commentaries, and that's where I think, and the feature stories, which Mey just submitted a cover story to me, where we can see people sort of stretch their limbs a bit when it comes to writing, because there's only so much creativity you can get you can have when you're, writing a 300, 400 word story about a news event that just took place that morning. But when you have a feature story or a commentary, you can really stretch your wings. I was able to write a commentary for the print, and it went digital. It was online as well, about my son, who's a child of color, during the uprising last year after George Floyd's killing. And it was just so different from what I do on a daily basis. And I think, in my elder years, I would definitely like to have more time um, to write and to be creative in that sense. I know all of us are just so busy and facing deadlines, um, that we don't have time to really sit with stories as much as we'd like. So I'm hoping that time will come in the future when I have a luxury of time, but I don't have it now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm sure a lot of us can. And on the reporting side, any thoughts there, just real quickly?
With the reporting side, I think it's always, if possible, if you can get something original. And I'll tell you something, when we have something that's original, whether it's a story that we broke or an interview, it always does better than something that we have seen and we're putting our own sort of spin on it, and maybe, um, just covering it even though it's been covered by another outlet. When we have original reporting, the readers respond. If you can find someone who can give you a quote, if you can ask an expert to give you some macro context on something that happened, um, then you're offering something different. And sometimes you can get a quote very quickly, and you can add some real important context, and it's not going to eat up half your day. And it really does a service to the reader and to your editor, because I think you'll be rewarded with traffic, if you can say that this is exclusive to us, and this is something that you won't find anywhere else. When we have an issue sometimes with other publications that will sort of lift our reporting, and sometimes they will say, according to the Advocate or report at the Advocate, sometimes they won't, and sometimes they'll link to what our original story, and sometimes they won't. So I think that's just a courtesy in journalism, and it's something we always extend to other publications if we're using some of their reporting, to always name that publication and to link to them. We don't always get that reciprocated, but
Well, I mean, that's fascinating and troubling, because I mean, it's not just courteous, it's ethical, right?
right.
Journalistic integrity is still a thing, I think, should be.
Yeah, you don't
Um,
want to tell people, you don't want to insinuate that this is a quote that was given to you directly, or you have to be clear about that. So yeah, it's important.
So let's go to pitching, talking about content. We'll start with you, Neal. What kind of stories do you want to be pitched? What's getting your attention these days? And how does one pitch an LGBTQ plus story, especially if maybe they never have, maybe they're not a member of the community, maybe they're not out, whatever. Is there anything special they should know? And then I also want to hear from Mey on this, about what kind of, as a reporter before she was a staff writer, what worked for her and what didn't work. So we'll start with you, Neal, as a receiver of
A lot of
good
pitches.
and bad pitches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm thinking of both from publicists and from writers, and I think we all know, I'm assuming everyone who's listening in is very busy, and so it's got to be succinct, it's got to be to the point. And I get pitches that are a Jane Austen novel, and I can't read that, I just can't. And you've
Sure,
got
you'd love to, but you just can't,
you got to
because
get to
there's
the
a thousand
point.
others
There's a
in your
thousand other
inbox that
things,
day, literally. Yeah.
emails, and then there's deadlines, and there's just meetings, there's just so many things that have to be done, that I see, like, the 8-paragraph pitch, and I can't even get through it. So it's got to be succinct, and it's got to be original. And I think there's a very simple rule that I learned that I didn't know when I first started, but it came to me, which is, if it interests you, it's probably going to interest the reader. So just trust your gut. Like if you read a pitch and you're like, whoa, oh, I never thought of it that way, or this is something I never would have put two and two together. I mean, with all these pride pitches that we're talking about, where all these companies are trying to get coverage of a product that they're putting out that has some sort of rainbow on it. There was one, I think, there's a few that stood out, and I'm trying to remember them. I remember there was one that was related to hunger in the LGBTQ community. And it was saying that they were giving a portion of proceeds to this organization that addresses that. And I don't see much coverage about that issue, and it is an issue. There's a lot of queer people who are living below the poverty line, and they just don't have enough to eat. I mean, it flies in the face of this image of, rich white gay men in Key West or Provincetown, sipping margaritas, but that's only a portion of the queer community. So that got my attention because that seemed like something different and something very important that we don't cover enough. So I
Yeah,
think
I think it's factual to say that in aggregate, as a community, the LGBTQ plus community taken as a whole is actually poorer than the average American.
It's true. And a lot of LGBTQ couples.
So that was unique, though. That's interesting because it goes
was
against
unique.
that. So kind of closing out that idea of uniqueness, and can you recall a time recently where you may have been delightfully surprised by a newcomer, someone out of nowhere, sending you an unexpected pitch, and it was?
I mean, I'm always happy when someone says, rather than they just send me a draft and they say, what do you think of this? And I can understand why some people would be leery of that, thinking that some unethical editor would just publish it or not give them credit. But it's always, when I can see that story and I can read through it, that always helps. I remember this was maybe a year or two ago. A doctor in Oregon, just unsolicited, sent me a story that he wrote about being a gay man in med school. I think it was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and just this, he was talking about all his friends that he had back then, and it was sort of like the HBO movie It's a Sin. It brought you into this, this young man's world, and all the fun that they were having, and then one by one the friends were dying because of HIV and AIDS. And it was so devastating how he drew this picture in words of this friend group in the 80s, and how they just came apart, and he was the lone survivor amongst about five young men. And it was just so heartfelt and honest and beautiful, and it was just unsolicited, and I ran it, and it got so much attention, and it was really, really loved. And so yeah, that really sticks with me. And sometimes you'll see a pitch, and again, you won't have that much time to, even if it is succinct, you won't have time to read it. So you could miss something like that, like one of those gems. So at least give it a quick read through, and you could find a piece that is just a dream that you never would have even thought of soliciting. Just comes to you. That
I can hear that it did stick with you, and I think I might look it up. I think I might look for it. I didn't see it at the time. Mey, when you've pitched as a freelancer, what has worked for you, and what doesn't work?
Yeah, I think what Neal said, if it interests you, it's going to interest readers. I think that's great advice, both as an editor and as a writer. Write something that you're interested in.
So that's a difference between, there's a difference between that, Fred, an authentically interesting piece to you versus something you think people would be interested in.
Yeah, like a lot of people can tell if you're just faking interest, and if you're excited about a story that you're writing, that excitement is going to spread to the reader. and that's going to spread to the editor, and people are going to latch onto it more and relate to it more. And so I think that would be my number one tip. Write something that you think is interesting and something that you're passionate about, something that, you know, lights your fire.
So I'm getting a reminder. We did talk a little bit before, and thank you for that answer. And I think that's sound advice. In your bio, one of the things that we mentioned that you do is that you're a sensitivity reader. I don't like to look like I'm not sophisticated and in the know, but I didn't know what it meant, May.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, it's what I do as a sensitivity reader. I get like editors or publishers or writers will contact me. I've worked on TV scripts, video games, comic books, novels, even like HR manuals. And they'll hire me as a transgender sensitivity reader. So if there's a transgender character or storyline in the book, or if in the example of an HR manual, when they're writing about like pronouns and dead names, as we discussed, and like what's proper use, that kind of thing, I'll read what they have written and edit it and consult on it, give them advice, tell them if any parts of it are outdated or are just like plain transphobic. But it's been a thing I've been doing for 6 or 7 years, and it's really wonderful.
What's the conduit into that work, if there are freelancers out there that might have some expertise and didn't know that they could, share it and make it help, that when you're a freelancer, that's like an array of sources for your income, and all together you cobble it together. And how does one go about offering their expertise as a sensitivity reader? And it sounds like you're saying that work is applicable to various minority.
There are sensitivity readers for different ethnicities and races. There are Black sensitivity readers, Indigenous sensitivity readers, sensitivity readers with disabilities, who come from different backgrounds. People need sensitivity readers for bisexual characters or storylines, for gay men, for all identities.
Does that work come to you by way of an agency or a publisher, or?
Well, so it comes from a lot of places. Sometimes so I started because I made a lot of connections in the comics world, editors and publishers there, because I would write, as a journalist, I would write a lot about comics and graphic novels, specifically LGBTQ ones. And so then when some of those publishers started getting like publishing comics that featured trans characters, but that were written by cisgender writers, they wanted someone to look over it who had expertise, and so they would reach out to me. And then I also, like on my website and on my social media, I mentioned that I'm a sensitivity reader. I know on social media, people will do like a search for sensitivity reader and an identity. So, they'll type like trans sensitivity reader into the Twitter search bar, or gay sensitivity reader, and find people that way. There used to be a sensitivity reader database. I'm not sure if it still exists. But yeah, so make sure you put your email on your website or on your social media so that people can contact you about it. That's how I get nearly all of these offers, is through email. Editors and publishers and writers will reach out to me saying like, I have a novel with a trans character, or we are updating the language in our textbook, to include.
Okay, we're getting starting to get a lot of questions about this. So Eileen's, our president's intuition was right. This is really an interesting subject for people. And they can follow you on Twitter, ask you questions?
Mey Rude, MEYRUDE. And for sensitivity reading things, you can email me at meyrude@gmail.com. That's on my website, that everywhere you look me up is that contact information, because that's also another thing. Like when you're pitching places, you need to have your contact information in there. Like there's so many people who will put like on Twitter, like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, but then editors have no way to contact them. And so that's a thing that you need to put out there, is your contact information.
And our colleague Gail Falkenthal thanks you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's good information and so fascinating. It almost sounds like you were there in the beginning of the or near the beginning of that particular industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, for a long time, like in Hollywood, for example, they would sort of have trans consultants that they wouldn't pay and that they wouldn't credit. I know a lot of people have done that kind of thing. And then it's just in the past less than a decade, we've finally been starting to get paid for doing this. It used to just be that, you know, you would ask your trans friend or ask your gay friend, like, I have a script, what should I do about this, you know? But now we're finally getting paid.
Hey, you're trans, tell me everything about trans people so I can know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of like what I say when people want me to write. There are a few exceptions that I get other value from, but in general, you know, oh, well, I'll give you a byline. I'm like, you know, I cannot pay my rent with a byline.
Yeah.
My landlord doesn't take bylines. Or, you know, but I'm glad that the expertise is valued. And you know what, that's kind of, there's so much bad news. It's like, it's good news to hear that there's a desire and interest.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a pretty bro world in the comic industry. It used to be anyway.
Yeah, it's getting better though, and definitely a lot of publishers like have now put aside money to hire sensitivity readers on books and on comic books. I know that, for example, when I started, usually even like if you were working for a big publisher like Scholastic, the writer would pay me out of their pocket. But now the publishers are paying themselves, and it's been a
beautiful.
huge,
Boy,
it's been a great change.
That's the way. That's a trend I'd like to see much more of. That's really good news. So let's see. We are down to about our last 8 minutes or so. So I'm going to kind of just scan my list of questions we had prepared here and see if any jump out. And I think we might have a couple from our audience. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Yeah, so there's only 2 more prepared questions. So I'm going to ask them real quickly, and you guys just decide which of you wants to jump in. Any surprises in your newsroom lately? Whether it's story development, whether it's industry trends, whether it's, I mean, if it's somebody slipped on a banana peel, maybe not that, but.
I think that there's a shift going on right now. And you know, and I don't want to give too much credit to the former guy, as Biden calls him, but I think that I think there's, and I think a lot of it has to do with COVID too, where our readers specifically, and of course that we're, you know, a niche audience. We're not a, a general People magazine audience. That they are hungry for happier, for lighter news, for stories of people being together and being joyful. And some of the darker stories are harder to get eyes on. And actually, it's also, you know, George Floyd, and there's plenty of it was a very dark time, I think, you know, in the past few years. And I think there was a bit of exhaustion. And so we have to sort of navigate where the reader sentiment is and what they're responding to. And I'm surprised that it's changed so dramatically in just months.
There's an appetite, that sensibility you're talking about. There does seem to be an appetite for sweetness, for a naivete that we were just too cool for school for before.
Yeah,
I think it's a real thing. Yeah.
I think a lot of our readers operated in crisis mode for a long time, especially our trans readers or our readers of color. Um, and it was a five-alarm fire for a long time, and it still very much is. COVID has not gone away, but I think there's a little bit of whiplash, there's a little bit of PTSD,
Oh,
and I think that we have to look at what is resonating. I think we all do as journalists have to look at people are responding to, because when you look at an overview of reader trends, things are changing, and things are evolving, and people are reader people are dying, and younger people are consuming news, and it's just the world is changing very fast, and we
I
have
couldn't
to
agree more. Could not agree
adapt.
more. So, there's the last question. It's such a powerful one that I think I will go ahead and ask it, and then we'll have like 2 minutes to take an audience question or two maybe. Talking about taboo language, is there such a thing specific to LGBTQ plus media that should be there should be some awareness of?
I mean, I think we just try not to shame people. I mean, we write a lot about, um, you know, the kink community and people who are polyamorous, and um, I think we don't present it in a he manner. Like there's just, I myself have just grown to be less and less judgmental as I've gotten older and read about um, different people and different lifestyles and different experiences. And I think we reflect that. And not what's taboo is intolerance and bigotry, and as far as our audience, racism, transphobia. But as far as people who are just living their lives and not um, acting maliciously, um, no, there's not much that's taboo.
I'm glad you brought up that idea of shame, though. That should be, I mean, dangerously shaming people for things that are just nature. Or, well, here's an example, and I don't want to just don't get up too far off field, but there's a such thing as addiction shaming. People
Mhm.
who have addiction disease
Right.
are frequently shamed to death for
Mhm.
having that disease. We don't shame cancer patients.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's and in the LGBTQ plus community, we have a disproportionate number of uh, people living with addiction disease and dying
And
with it as well.
and body type too. I mean, I think
Mhm.
Body type is
if
another.
if people are um, if they have different body sizes, and there's a lot of people will shame someone who's very fit and very
Mm.
um they have an 8-pack, and we don't want to do that. I mean, everyone has a right to present to the world how they want to present, and um whether they're big or they're small, um if they're not hurting anyone, we don't pass judgment on them, and we hope that our readers follow our lead.
Sorry, I'm covering up my screen. The perils of using your iPhone on a Zoom meeting. So, well, thank you so much. That's really really I think important conversation. And we are, I think we're right at 6 o'clock. Oh, I mean 7 o'clock. Make that 6:59. Eileen, do you want to jump in? Is there a question that I've missed in our audience that you'd like me to ask as the last question for our panelists?
She went to the audience side, so she can't talk to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I guess you can't talk to me. Sorry. Well, I think we're going to probably wrap it up there. I think we covered a lot, and a lot of good information has been shared and gleaned, and we have shared some links and email addresses and Twitter handles.
Well, and I would just like to say about taboo language.
Yes.
The style guide, I think, is helpful for that kind of thing also. I recently, Neal helped me with my first cover story for Plus, and I'm not living with HIV. I don't have a lot of history of writing stories about people who are living with HIV, and so a style guide like that helps me to know the language that's good to use and that's not shaming.
Well,
it's a learning curve. I mean, I myself am not living with HIV when I took the job, and there's a lot of terminology, and you have to be respectful. And everything makes sense. I remember my editor saying um, that there was a headline that used the word dirty or clean, and it wasn't referring to people with HIV, but it still, she said that's a triggering word because a lot of HIV terminology people will say, are you clean?
yeah.
Before,
So in other words, you
and
mean like someone said that, I don't know what the headline was, but in other words, using dirty as a way of saying something was not accurate or polluted with disinformation,
Mhm.
but using the word dirty in a
yeah,
especially a gay publication.
it was in reference to clean, and I know a lot of people with HIV are asked if they're clean, and it was just, she says that she told me it's triggering, and she absolutely was right, and I wasn't referring to HIV in the headline, but still it was enough that it should have been changed, and we changed it. So you just have to be malleable, and you have to you have to adapt and learn new things and learn about people's lives that you aren't familiar with, or you'll be left behind. You
Yeah.
got to open your mind.
What This has been really, really fascinating and wonderful. Thank you all. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks for coming and sharing this wealth of information and experience with us.